First, we are honored to have today's speaker, Rabbi David Stav, lead us in the Kel Male Rachamim.
אל מלא רחמים, שוכן במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה על כנפי השכינה, במעלות קדושים וטהורים, כזוהר הרקיע מזהירים, לנשמת זאב בן יונה, שהלך לעולמו, בעבור שבלי נדר, ניתן צדקה בעד הזכרת נשמתו, בגן עדן תהא מנוחתו, לכן בעל הרחמים יסתירהו בסתר כנפיו לעולמים, ויצרור בצרור החיים את נשמתו, אדוני הוא נחלתו, וינוח בשלום על משכבו, ונאמר אמן.
תודה רבה, Rav Stav. For anybody who doesn't know him, Rav David Stav, is quite an influential rabbi in Israel. He serves as the rabbi of the city of Shoham. Previously, he served as the rabbi of the religious film school Ma'aleh and was one of the founding heads of Yeshivat Hesder Petach Tikva. He is the author of Bein Ha-Zemanim, a book about culture and recreation in Jewish thought and law, Avo Beitecha on issues of modesty and intimacy, and Parsha Baketana on the weekly Parsha. Rav Stav is also chairman of Tzohar, which is Keeping Israel Jewish Together. Tzohar was founded in 1995 and now numbers approximately 800 religious Zionist rabbis. Tzohar's mission is to bridge the gaps between religious and secular Jews in Israel and unite them as one people. This unity is so important. Jabotinsky was keenly aware of the importance of unity. He insisted, as recorded and reported by Ben-Zion Netanyahu, who was, among many other achievements, Jabotinsky's personal secretary, he insisted that the path of Zionism must be supported by public pressure, the voice of the masses, in order to be successful. This requires unity. Looking back on our history as we approach the month of Av, which begins at sundown tomorrow, we must recall that disunity was in large part responsible for the fall of our two temples. We thank Rav Stav for his vital work. One of Israel's most visible rabbinic figures, he regularly appears on Israeli television and radio and lectures worldwide to a wide range of audiences. And now we are lucky enough that I can give you Rav David Stav.
Hi, thank you so much for your warm introduction. And first of all, let me thank you all for coming to this event and to allow me to share with you some thoughts regarding Jabotinsky's approach to the issues that Tzohar is dealing with on a daily basis in the state of Israel. I'm not an expert in all the literature that Zeev Jabotinsky has written, but I could share with you that there are a lot of theories about Jabotinsky's approach to the relationship that should exist between state and church in the state of Israel. I could share with you that maybe one of the biggest challenges that splits the Israeli society today, and I will refer to Jabotinsky's approach as a kind of a source of inspiration to maybe what should be done, and in a way, Tzohar is following this path.
Hello. Hi, you on your Zoom?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
I think somebody has to be muted.
Okay, it's going to cost a lot of money because I wanted to check.
Ellie Hertz.
Okay. one of the issues that splits the state of Israel today is the tension that exists between state and church, and I will try to explain it to you in several sentences. As I read in one of the chats here, that somebody wrote that his children got married, his or her children got married through Tzohar rabbis. What does it mean to get married through a Tzohar rabbi? Why is it needed? So before we begin, let me share with you a few assumptions that needed to be shared, needed to be exposed in order to understand the current situation of the state of Israel. Israel was established as a Jewish state based on three fundamental laws that define Israel as a Jewish state. By the way, that's one of the issues that Jabotinsky writes quite often. What are the relationship between the definition of the state and the freedom of the individual? We will talk about it. Israel was defined as a Jewish state by three fundamental laws. One is the law of return. The second is the law of marriage and divorce. Three is the law of the holidays. Each one of the laws, when the state of Israel was established and the laws were accepted, they were well received. I could say that most of the vast majority of the Israeli society, I would say 90 to 95% of the people were very happy with them, with these three laws. A is the law of return. The law of return actually says that whoever is Jewish, but not only if he's halachically Jewish, but even if his father or his mother, his grandfather or his grandmother are Jewish, is entitled to make aliyah and to get automatically, immediately, Israeli citizenship. That's the first law. The second law, the state does not belong to the people that live there now. The state belongs to the Jewish people, wherever they are. And therefore, one of the very first decisions that the state was taking was to enable every Jew, and even if halachically he is not Jewish, to enable him to make aliyah. As one of the authors has written once, whoever was Jewish enough for Hitler to be sent to the concentration camps will be Jewish enough for us to be well received in Israel. As it really happened recently when the refugees from Ukraine escaped and they had no other place to escape, and Israel was one of the places where they escaped to. That's the first bill. The second bill is the bill of marriage and divorce. In Israel, unlike America, unlike any other Western country, there is no civil marriage in Israel. In Israel, you could get married only through the religion you are associated with. So if you are a Christian, you have to get married through the church. If you are Jewish, you have to get married through the rabbinate. And if you are Muslim, you have to get married through the Qadi or through the Imam. Bill number 3 is the law of the holidays. In Israel, the official holidays are those who fit to the Jewish calendar: Shabbat, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Pesach, Sukkot, etc., etc. These are the official holidays where there is no universities and no school and no government offices, etc., etc. All these 3 laws are today challenging to the Israeli society. And I'll try to focus on one thing in order to give you the feeling of what's going on today. I'll give one example. Take, for instance, the law of return. The law of return enables everybody that his father or his mother or his grandfather or his grandmother are Jewish to come to Israel and to make aliyah. Now, 50 years ago, 60 years ago, when this law was accepted in the Knesset, I mean, you had to be really crazy, or to say it in Yiddish, really Meshiganer, to come to Israel if you weren't really Jewish by ideology, Jewish by identity, and even halachically Jewish. Because to go to a country that suffers from terror, from a very weak economy, from unemployment, from ongoing terror attacks, etc., why would you come to Israel if you weren't Zionist or Jewish or whatever? That's not the case today. Today, Israel, Baruch Hashem, is one of the strongest countries in the world, one of the strongest economies. So many people want to come and to escape to Israel, even if they are not Jewish, even if they are not Zionist, just because that's a very comfortable place to come to live in. So Israel, just to get you the numbers, today Israel has about 9 million citizens. Let's talk about the non-Arabic society. We're talking about 7 million citizens. Out of these 7 million citizens, we are talking about more than 1.5 million citizens that are new immigrants that arrived to Israel based on the law of return from the 1990s. I'm not talking about those who arrived in the 70s or 80s. I'm talking about those who arrived after 1990. Now, I was explaining in a minute why is the 1990 important. Now, all these people, when they come to Israel, and by the way, these people that arrived and brought a lot of bless to the Israeli economy and to the Israeli society, because the people that arrived to Israel were very highly educated, and they were doctors and scientists and high technology people, etc. The fact that Israel is so strong economically today is very much as a result of this blessing immigrants that arrived to Israel. But there is one small problem. All these 1.5 million people, if they want to get married in Israel, they find themselves in a very torturing path of need to prove that they are halachically Jewish, because otherwise nobody will marry them in Israel. Now, if these people want to get married and they have no other way to get married in Israel but through the rabbinate will say, and I could not blame them, you have to prove that you are Jewish, because we do not marry a Jewish with a non-Jewish spouse, so you have to prove that you are Jewish. Now, how does he know? How could he prove that he is Jewish? All of a sudden, he discovers that it's very challenging to prove that you are Jewish. Why? I will explain in a minute. How do you know that you are Jewish? Usually, the main evidence is, I'm sorry, I have to put the camera in a way that, okay. The main evidence that approves your Judaism is that you got married with an Orthodox rabbi and you have a ketubah. So after we finish this meeting, everybody goes to see if he finds the ketubah at home, or now, because if his kids want to make aliyah, they will need to bring this ketubah with them. But for the Russian people that arrived to Israel from a country that was under a communist regime for decades, none of them got married religiously. None of them has ketubah. None of them has a rabbi that could approve that he's Jewish. Now, all these people find themselves all of a sudden in Russia. They were cursed as Jews, Zheed, and all of a sudden they come to Israel and they discover that for us, they are not Jewish, Russian, Ukrainian, they are not Jewish. Now, this causes a lot of tension between groups. Could you imagine a boy or a girl who went to the army, served in the army, go to the university, they fell in love with an Israeli boy or girl, and all of a sudden, when they want to get married, they find that it's almost impossible mission to prove that he or she are Jewish. So that's challenge number one, because as a result of this definition of Israel as a Jewish state, that on one side brings in hundreds of thousands of immigrants, on the other side, you can get married in Israel only halachically. And if that's the case, people find themselves in a very, very tough situation. Challenge number one. Challenge number 2. When Israel was established, for most Israelis, to get married through the rabbinate wasn't a challenge. When you don't have food to bring home, you don't really care how you get married. That's not in the highest priority issues that you take in consideration. B, most of the people came from traditional homes, even if they were secular. But if the parents asked them, please get married in a halachic way, okay, it wasn't an issue. But C, which is the most important thing, there wasn't another option. For Israelis in the 50s, in the 60s, to fly to Cyprus, they didn't have bread, they didn't have eggs, they didn't have meat. They would fly to Cyprus. It was, to fly to Cyprus 50 years ago was just like to fly to Australia back and forth. I mean, it's something that takes a long time, requires a lot of resources, and nobody was doing that. To live together without getting married, that wasn't a common behavior in the 50s or the 60s. All this has been changed in the last 20, 30 years. To fly to Cyprus is much cheaper than to fly to Eilat. A weekend in Cyprus, in 5-star hotel in Larnaca or in Paphos is twice cheaper than an average hotel in Eilat. So people have no problem to fly to Cyprus. B, people are much less traditional because their parents already do not grow with the rabbis with them. And C, which is maybe the most important thing, for most of them, there is not a problem, not even to get married at all. So they could live together for 3, 5, 6 years. Just for your knowledge, today in Tel Aviv, for more than 45% of the children are raised by families that the parents are not married, which means that, or at least are not married by the rabbinate, which means that for the average secular Israeli today, this is not an issue. So you can ask yourself, so if that's the case, why do I care? Why? Because once you don't get married through the rabbinate, eventually your kids will not be recognized as Jews, because the rabbinate will say later on, wait a minute, what's going on here? How come you did not get married with the rabbinate? Maybe you are not Jewish, maybe your wife is not Jewish. This will put a question mark on the personal status of the child. Now, this brings to hatred, this brings to distance, this brings people to feel that Judaism is not for them. This causes a lot of damage to the relationship, because people will say, wait a minute, just because of you, the religious people, I could not get married in a proper way, civilly, etc., etc. I gave you just 2 examples to the sources of tension that exist today between observant and non-observant people. And that's without talking not about corruption, not about nothing, just about bureaucracy and what is perceived as religious coercion by the secular society. I say perceived because some will maintain it's not perceived, it's the truth. And some will say, wait a minute, it's a law in the Knesset, just every law that is coercive, this is a coercive law. But eventually, it's perceived to be a coercive law. Add to that the challenge with public transportation on Shabbat, opening stores on Shabbat, service in the army of different groups that do not go to army, etc., and you got a precise recipe for a very divisive society that lives in the state of Israel. Now, before I continue and connect this to Jabotinsky's way of thinking, I want you all to know, we are now in the era of the 3 weeks between Shiva Asar B'Tammuz and Tisha B'Av. Next Shabbat is the Tisha B'Av, and the fast is postponed to the next Sunday, in 10 days from now, in 11 days from now. I want you to know, there was never an external threat that destroyed the Jewish people. It was always us, that we were experts in self-destruction. It was never because of others. Others took advantage of our behavior. And the deepest concern that we should be concerned today, and I could quote Ephraim Halevi, the former head of the Mossad, I could quote others. Trust me, the biggest threat on the state of Israel is not the Iranian threat and not the Hezbollah threat. It's the big divide between the different tribes that the Israeli society is consisted of. The fact that so many Jews feel so much alienated, oppressed, coerced by others, controlled by others, and therefore this is a source of hatred. This is the recipe for destruction. The destruction of the first temple began when the kingdom of Solomon was divided to the kingdom of Judea and the Israeli kingdom. That was the beginning of the process of the destruction of the first temple and the kingdom of Solomon. We have to understand that. We're not talking about luxury. We're talking about the real issues that could break society apart and could cause the Israeli society to fall apart. Therefore, we, as a Zionist rabbis, and now since we are in a kind of event that we recall a bit of the philosophy of Zeev Jabotinsky, I would like to mention 2 issues, 2 elements that are very, very clear in his philosophy. A, the freedom of the individual. B, the character of the nation, the character of society. And these are 2 issues that today do not exist, are not implemented. Unfortunately, even by a few of his followers, because of political reasons, because of other issues, but eventually, in the bottom line, they are not followed. You cannot tell a couple that wants to get married in his own way that it is not permitted to do so, and you want him to feel that he's free. Now, there is a reason why we coerce him, because we don't want the Israeli society to be assimilated. But we have to find, do we accomplish that goal, or the fact that we coerce and we prohibit civil marriage maybe adds more hatred to Judaism, maybe adds more couples that intentionally will get married in a civil way. All surveys that are done in Israel show that the percentage of people that will get married traditionally, halachically, will not be changed if the law will be cancelled. Because the vast majority of the Israeli society will still continue to marry in a traditional way, but they don't want to be coerced to that. We in Tzohar, 27 years ago, we established our organization that started with 2 major projects. A is the marriage project, and B, that was complementary, that completed the idea of the A, was to help all immigrants that arrived to Israel to prove their Jewish status. So I will just share with you two anecdotes. Today, by the way, we perform every year more than 4,500 weddings for secular people every year. On the other hand, we help more than 20,000 people to prove their Jewish status in order to help them to integrate in Israeli society and to help them to be a part of the Jewish people in the state of Israel, to get married, to celebrate bar mitzvot, etc., etc. I would like to share with you two anecdotes. One anecdote, a boy came to us a few years ago saying, I'm Jewish. How do you know that you're Jewish? Well, my mother said to me that I'm Jewish. So we call the mother. How do you know that you're Jewish? Well, listen to that story. I was raised in a Christian family, but I'm Jewish. How do you know? They told me that I'm Jewish. What's your story? How come a Christian family in Ukraine raises a Jewish girl? And she comes with an unbelievable story. Her mother got married to a Ukrainian boy, a non-Jewish boy. When the Nazis arrived to Ukraine, they took her mother and herself to the forest to kill them, just like they've done to many other Jews, like Babi Yar and other places. Her mother was quite smart, and she realized that she's going to be killed, she with her daughter. So she took an advantage when somebody did not pay attention, and she commanded the daughter to escape to her father. And she told her to tell her father where she's taken to. She escaped to her father, and her father took her to his parents, his Christian parents, and he said to them, look, I'm going with my wife. I cannot leave her alone. I'm going with her, but I want to ask you, please raise my daughter as a Jewish girl, because that's what she's mother. That's what her mother is. He died with his wife in this forest, and the daughter grew up. She got married. She made Aliyah with her son, and then now they are coming to us. An amazing story, but there is one question: who said that the story is truth? Who said that that's the truth? They could make up a story. So we sent one of our rabbis to that village, to that town. Was sitting there in all the archives for 2 weeks until he found an article describing the story of the noble Christian boy that went to die with his wife in the forest, mentioning his name, mentioning his wife's name, mentioning the parents' name that raised the child, their granddaughter actually. And that was brought to Jerusalem and was approved as an evidence that this boy is Jewish. And I will never forget that when we made a brunch with a few of our donors and they asked him, why was it so important for him to prove that he is Jewish? And he said, I knew since I grew up that I will need to take revenge someday to the Nazis that murdered my grandparents. And I asked myself, what would be the revenge? And I said, the revenge is one, that nobody will be able to erase my Jewish identity. I will continue to be Jewish. I will continue to get married in a Jewish way so that my kids will be accepted as Jews. This will be my victory on the Nazis. So that's just one example of the holy work that we are doing on a daily basis to try to bridge these gaps between people that feel that somehow the Jewish identity is taken from them and they are coerced to do things that they don't like to do. And I just gave an example of one of the issues, one of the projects that we are involved in. But since I promised Judy that runs this session, that I will not speak more than 30 minutes. So I trust me, I could continue. I don't hear you because you are muted. I could continue for hours. So, Judy, if you wanted to make a comment and to
You
leave,
can go on a bit.
I could go on a bit. Okay. I promised 2 anecdotes. I will continue with the second anecdote. There used to be a time in Israel that when people arrived to Israel and they had no proof that they're Jews, so the rabbis would ask them, do you speak Yiddish? And if people spoke Yiddish, this was accepted as a proof that they're Jewish. Later on, the rabbinate decided speaking Yiddish is not enough because there were many places where Goyim, where Gentiles were involved in business with Jews and they spoke also Yiddish. So this is not a proof. So they said, but there is another proof. If they know to read Yiddish, that will be a proof that the boy or the girl, the man or the woman are Jews. So now listen to the story. The girl comes to us and says, I'm Jewish. How do you know that you're Jewish? My mother told me I'm Jewish. How does your mother know? Well, her mother told her. Where's your grandma? Well, she lives in Hekveld in Moldavia. So we sent our rabbi there with a video camera, telling him, you need to check if she knows to read Yiddish, because the granddaughter and the daughter said to us that she knows to read Yiddish. So he took with him a book in Yiddish, and he comes to her with a video camera, and he asks her, do you know Yiddish? Yes, of course I know. And she starts speaking Yiddish, but he has to check that she knows to read Yiddish. But you know how to read Yiddish? Yes, I know. Do you have read Yiddish books? Yes, of course I do. So he goes with her to the bookshelf and she takes out a book. Now, this book, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the literature that was written in the early 20th century in these places. This book was written by Yud Lamed Peretz, a very famous anti-religious author. He wrote a story named Apinta Leyid. Apinta Leyid speaks about a woman that her husband refused to give her a get. And after he was found and eventually he was convinced to give her a get, the get was written not in a proper way, and the letter Yud, which is written with a pintele, with a small apostrophe, was not written properly, and the rabbis canceled the get. And the story actually speaks very sharply against the rabbis that are very strict and not flexible, not this and that. Okay, so she starts reading fluently. The rabbi was very happy. He sends the cassette directly to the rabbis in Yerushalayim so that they could see the film and could approve. And the camera, the Israeli television was following that story, and the camera records 3 Haredi rabbis, with long beards, with a black kapot, and they say, well, she is Jewish. Now, to see the 3 Haredi rabbis that approve that somebody is Jewish based on the fact that he knows how to read a story that its essence is against the rabbis, this was a kind of a Jewish irony. So we have this kind of stories on a daily basis. By the way, this grandma passed away 2 weeks later, and Idiot Achronot, a very popular paper in Israel, went out with the headlines, Savta Operation. This Savta, this grandma, by her reading Yiddish in this Yiddish book, actually proved Jewish identity of 5 grandchildren of her. And by that, actually providing the only proof that these grandchildren could have in only to prove that they are Jewish. I could continue on, and if you want, I will. But I think, Judy, it's time for questions. And
I think you're right. I think it is time for some questions. First, I want to thank the Canadian Anti-Semitism Foundation and Zehut for co-sponsoring this talk. And I have a question of my own that came up just as I was listening to this last story. A Mizrahi Jew wanting to prove the same kind of thing, would their grandparent know how to read Yiddish?
the answer is no. And I guess that for the Mizrahi Jews, the answer will be, will they know Ladino or will they know other languages? I guess but to be honest with you, we almost don't have this kind of problem with Mizrahi Jews, with Sephardic Jews, because of a very simple reason. Even those who arrived from the former Soviet Union, from Kazakhstan and Georgia and other Sephardic places, most of them got married halachically. Unlike those who lived in Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, and these places that are mostly Ashkenazim, they have the problems. For those who arrived from other places, usually the communist regime wasn't as strict as in other original Russian places, and therefore they had a kind of relatively freedom of religion in those places.
And just as I'm going to take the liberty of one more question before we go to other people's questions.
I see in the chat, Judy, if you forgive me, I see in the chat somebody, Mark, I think, DNA. I get this as a question. Yes. Why don't you go through a DNA? So the answer is, I'll be very honest with you. A, the immigrants take the procedure of DNA as a very offending and insulting process. That's A. B, most of the rabbis, if not all of the rabbis, will never approve to rely on this. C, the DNA could never prove that somebody is not Jewish. It could only increase the chances that somebody is Jewish. So anyway, you cannot rely on it 100%. So therefore, it's not a solution because of all these reasons.
Okay, Rabbi Stav, there's a good question from one of our listeners about your discussion being very, very enlightening. However, can you reiterate and re-explain the connection to Zeev Jabotinsky? This is our Zeev Jabotinsky memorial.
Right. I see a few questions, but I will not refer to the questions because of your question. So I will say, Jabotinsky.
This is actually Kenneth Gutwein's question.
Jabotinsky basically was against any involvement of the state in the individual's life. And he was against any kind of involvement of the state in the freedom of the individuals in the marriage, if they will eat this way or another way, if you'll observe this, observe that. That was his basic philosophy. Therefore, the way the arrangements between state and church were taken in the first couple of years of the establishing of the state were done by Ben-Gurion. They were not done by Jabotinsky. So could always be that if Jabotinsky was the first prime minister, because of coalition and political circumstances, he would behave in a different way. I'm talking about his philosophy and his theories that he shared with us, not about, there's always a gap between what you write in your book and what you are able to implement when you are in the position. But in his books, he distinguishes between the character of the state and the definition of the state as a Jewish state, and getting into people's dishes, kitchens, and bedrooms. And getting married is one of the examples.
Okay. Nachum Niv would like to know,
Yeah.
would you convert an LGBT person? A gay person?
I see two questions about conversion of LGBT. The answer is very simple. We don't convert. So we don't convert not LGBT, and we don't convert others. So I could tell you, so it's a very easy answer, but I could tell you that I personally recommended people that are under my influence to convert kids of LGBT couples. Regarding Ketubah of Orthodox versus Reform and Conservative, it's a very, very good question regarding the Ketubot of people that come from conservative and Reform denominations. None of these Ketubot will be accepted in Israel as a proof, as an evidence for Jewish identity. As such, each one of the immigrants that brings with him Ketubah will need to go through a procedure that approves his Jewishness, and the Ketubah from the Reform and Conservative will not be accepted. By the way, we in Tzohar help every year more than 500 North American Jews that make Aliyah and need to go through this process of proving Jewishness. We do that almost on a daily basis. Should Jews encourage intermarriage if non-Jewish person will convert? That's if he converts, it's not intermarriage. By definition, intermarriage is if the spouse does not want to be a part of the Jewish people. If he wants to join we are not racist. Few of our biggest rabbis were converts. We don't have any problem with converts. The grandma of David the king was the Ruth, the convert. We have no problems with converts. We have problems with the intermarriage when the spouse doesn't want to be a part of the Jewish people.
Can I ask you what do you do? For instance, I was married as a conservative Jew. My parents were also married as conservative Jews. What do you do to help people like me prove that we're Jewish?
So first of all, you have to know that it's a challenge. It's not that easy. For instance, if you come to the rabbinate, they will tell you, we don't know that you're Jewish. Please go and help yourself. The only address, for instance, if you make Aliyah, Nefesh B'Nefesh will tell you right away, please save yourself from that experience. Please go to Tzohar and they will help you out. Now, what will we do with that? Let's take this example, which is a wonderful example. I guess that we will have to find who was your mother, and if she's still alive, who was her mother. I guess we will have to look where, if they're not alive, where are they buried, if they're buried in a Jewish cemetery, etc., etc. We will have to work in order to find out that halachically you are Jewish.
So in other words, if my grandparents are buried in the same cemetery as many, how do I prove that they're Orthodox? They're buried in the same cemetery.
No, you don't have to prove that. No, Judy, you don't have to prove that they were Orthodox. That's not what we need to prove. We need to prove that they were Jewish. That's the only thing we care about. If we know for sure that they were conservative Jews, it's 100% okay. That's not the issue. The issue is to make sure that they're Jewish. Why do we need to do that? Because in many cases, let's take, for instance, the Reform, because the conservative is more complicated. The Reform today could marry people that one of the spouses is not Jewish. So the fact that somebody brings Ketubah does not mean necessarily that he's Jewish, because it could be that his parents got married not one of them was not Jewish. I see many questions, but I don't know how to refer to them. I could not catch up.
I'm supposed to be the one reading these questions.
So please,
So-
Judy, save me from that work and read for me.
Mark R says, eliminate the diaspora or the diaspora will eliminate you. Zeev Jabotinsky Tisha B'Av from Joshua Cohn's The Netanyahu. That is not a question. The state of Israel will promote the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants, will be based on precepts of liberty, justice, and peace taught by the Hebrew prophets, will uphold the full social and political equality of all its citizens without distinction of race, creed, or sex, will guarantee full freedom of conscience, worship, education, and culture, will safeguard the sanctity and inviolability of shrines.
Well, that's a part of the Declaration of
And that's the
Independence.
Declaration of Independence.
That doesn't belong to Jabotinsky, but anyhow, this declaration does not deny the possibility and the option of religious marriage as the only way to get married in Israel, because it enables the Christians to get married in a Christian way. And this declaration does not mean that the country will enable intermarriage. That is not the definition, or that's not the explanation of this declaration, at least not by the Supreme Court.
We had an earlier question from Lauren Blatt, who asked, why don't Gentile Russians just marry as Christians?
Because they don't say they are Christians. If they are Christians and they maintain to be Christians, so then they could get married as Christians. But most of them maintain to be Jewish, but they have no way to prove that they're Jewish. Even those who maintain to be Gentiles have to prove that they are Gentiles. It's not an easy mission to prove that you are a Gentile. So they have to show the papers from the church. But most of them did not go to church in Russia because church was prohibited, just like synagogues were prohibited, churches were prohibited as well. So it's not that easy for them to prove that they are Gentiles. It's not that easy for them to prove that they are Jewish.
Is it true that most arrivals are not Jews by any reasonable definition?
Depends how do you define reasonable definition. If the halachic definition is the definition, so then you are right. Today, most of the immigrants that arrive to Israel do not come from a Jewish mother. Most of them come or from a Jewish father, or even further on, from a Jewish grandfather. That's true.
Okay, thank you. So I'm going to take the last, not question, but I was just asked by Glenn Richter, who is a veteran Chizuk mission traveler. AFSI does 2 missions, Chizuk missions a year to Israel. We do one in the fall and one in the spring. We used to do it for Chaya Sarah, but Chaya Sarah has become a little crazy. So we do one in the fall and one in the spring. Spring is usually Yom Yerushalayim or
I
Yom
can say
Ha'atzmaut.
shalom, or you continue, or it's for me.
And what he was asking was, could we have a meeting with you to discuss with you or somebody from Tzohar on our next mission to discuss some of these problems? I mean, that's what we do, is we go to the places where there are issues, where people are having trouble.
I will do that with joy and happiness. By the way, I say somebody that speaks about the rabbinate. We are working on this mission as well. We will be more than happy to see you all in Israel, to share with you some thoughts, to spend some time together. Maybe we could take you to one of the restaurants of the Kashrut of Tzohar. We'll be more than happy to discuss whatever you want. Please feel free, we have to schedule a few months ahead.
And we're nearing your time limit. Does the increase in the teaching of the self-defense to Jews a part of the legacy of Jabotinsky?
Ooh, wow. Please release me from the need to answer that.
Well, I mean, Jabotinsky believes in the iron wall. You know, the
course, I
iron
know
wall is you have to be stronger than
That's
your
not a question. The question is, what does it mean? What does it mean today when you're talking about self-defense?
self-defense.
What does it mean? I see that Karma wants to ask something.
Karma, go ahead. Can you unmute yourself? I'm going to you, Karma. And I just asked you to unmute.
Okay.
Karma,
It doesn't allow her.
ask to unmute. Oh,
Okay, yes, thank you. I actually wanted to ask if you wanted me to answer the question about self-defense on Jabotinsky, but that's up to you.
No, it's, you know,
That's my job. That's what I do professionally, so.
no, that's amazing. But I want you
Can
to
I ask
understand.
a question?
no, no,
I
no.
want to keep myself very, very much in distance from everything that smells from politics.
Okay,
And I stick to the
That's a
mission
question.
of bridging societies together, where Judaism is perceived to cause defense and to cause detention. I want Judaism to be the bridge.
So I will ask the question with
So
your
one
permission.
Go ahead.
It's okay, I can wait. If you have other questions, I can mute myself.
no, I know that it's 1 o'clock. Rabbi Stav had told me that he has a meeting at 1 o'clock. I want to respect that. However, people who want to stay on, we will stop the recording, and people who would like to stay on and speak with one another are welcome to do so.
So first